I am not Lauren Winner. She is much younger and infinitely more attractive than I am. And I'll tell you that saga later on. Several years ago, when I made my first Episcopal visit to the Church of the Upper Room out in Milliken, I was introduced to a young man, about 17, I think, who was a shepherd. I mean, that is what he did. He tended sheep. At that point, he attended sheep he took care of somebody else's sheep, but his goal was to have his own flock of sheep and to be a full shepherd within his own right. You don't run across many shepherds these days. And what made his story even more impressive was that in the Church of the Upper Room, this young man took a leadership role at 17. He was there to do work on work days. The Church of the Upper Room serves lunch every Sunday following the Eucharist, and it's rotated around as to who brings the main course, and when it's his time, he shows up with the main course. He is a great leader in the church. And then what blew everybody's mind was that year when they did the stewardship campaign and realized that the 17-year-old shepherd was the leading giver to the congregation. That embarrassed a few people, but I think we get the idea and the image of this person as a shepherd. Now, we carry images of shepherds around with us, and this fourth Sunday of Easter has for centuries been the Good Shepherd Sunday. And that's why we carry those images with us. And we have the 23rd Psalm, the one that finds so much comfort for people. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not be in want. But we get these images of Jesus taking care of us, the Good Shepherd taking care of us, consoling us, wrapping us up in the warmth and comfort of His presence. And if you go to the catacombs of Rome, some of the earliest representations of Christianity or of Jesus is as a young boy carrying a sheep on his shoulders as the Good Shepherd. So we have this great sense of the shepherd caring for us, taking care of us, watching over us, providing for our needs. And that's why we find so much comfort in the 23rd Psalm. But if you look at the lessons for this Sunday, if you look at the lessons for Good Shepherd Sunday, they really ought to make you a little uncomfortable. They really ought to make you stretch and examine yourself and take a second look at what you are. The first one from Acts, the story of Acts, is Peter and John in the post-resurrection days are still in Jerusalem. The Christians were still going to the temple on a daily basis to pray, as well as meeting on Sundays for the Eucharist. And at some point, Peter and John heal a sick man at the temple. And for this healing miracle, they're called before the Jewish authorities. And the Jewish authorities say, by what power, by what name have you healed this man? And Peter and John say, this man is standing before you in good health by the name of Jesus Christ of Nazareth. And later on they say, there is salvation in no one else, for there is no other name under heaven given among mortals by which we must be saved. This makes some people a little embarrassed these days, a little tense. How do we take our belief that Jesus Christ is the way, the truth, and the life? And then how do we relate to our brothers and sisters who are Muslim or Hindu or Buddhist or something like that? And that's an argument that gets kicked around a lot these days in circles. And I don't have an answer to it, but I believe, that Jesus Christ is the way. Now, how God tends to deal with other people is God's problem, and I don't have to worry about that because I've got enough to take care of in my own life. I've got enough to take care of by just living my life according to how God wants me to. But we have to make this first decision in this first lesson of who is Jesus for us. You can follow the guidelines of C.S. Lewis, who said Jesus is either the Messiah, the Son of God, he is who he is and says he was, or he's completely nuts. And who's going to follow a crazy person? And who's more crazy, the person who follows a crazy person or the crazy person? So C.S. Lewis would say we have to make a choice. And C.S. Lewis has basically said, I don't think Jesus was crazy. So that only leaves us one opportunity, one alternative of who he is. So, if if we grant that Jesus is the Son of God, if he is the Messiah, then that leads us on to the rest of the lessons. And again, they should make us a little uncomfortable. John, in his letter to the Christians around the world at that day, says, we ought to lay down our lives for one another. How does God's love abide in everyone who has the world's goods and sees a brother or sister in need and yet refuses help? And John is saying, as Jesus laid down his life for us, then we ought to lay down our lives for each other. Now, we might get a little tense about that. And, we're not, how many of us will jump on a hand grenade or something like that? Well, we've talked about that. We've seen people do it. But it's more than that as well. Laying down our lives for somebody may be putting aside that which is convenient for us so that we can do something for somebody who makes us feel inconvenient. Last week on Facebook, one of the pictures that went around was reposted a number of times, had a phrase from St. John Chrysostom, who was an early Christian monk in the Middle East. And St. John says, if you cannot find Jesus in the homeless person and the hungry person outside the church door, then you're not going to find Jesus in the chalice of the altar either, because the two are infinitely related. So when St. John talks about us laying down our lives for each other, it's laying down our lives in the sense of saying, I'm going to put myself second so that I can put you first. And it's discovering the needs that people have and taking the time to realize that we all are wounded and we all have our sore spots and we all have our sinful parts and we have those places we don't want to talk about. And we all carry those wounds or scars around with us. And we need somebody to say to us sometime, it's okay. Let me help you through this. Take my hand and I will lead you. Let me bind up your wounds today and help you today. But we have to take the time to find out what those wounds are. We have to set aside our own egos and reach out to those who are around us who may be in great need. So basically, John in his letter says, we're supposed to act like Christians. If we're going to follow Jesus' way, we need to follow what Jesus did. He reiterates that in his gospel. And Jesus says, I lay down my life for my sheep. That is something that, we don't want to do sometimes. It makes us feel uncomfortable. But that is what the shepherd does. We have this story, this parable where Jesus tells the story about the shepherd who leaves the 99 sheep and goes looking for the one lost sheep. And if you tell that story in the Middle East today or any place where people take care of shepherds, they'll say, that's the dumbest thing we ever heard. Why would you leave 99 good sheep to go look for one lost sheep who's probably going to die or be subject to coyotes or wolves? And that's the point of Jesus' story. Jesus says, everybody is worth my attention. Everybody is worth my care, my concern. So, yes, if you are lost, you're the one I'm looking for. And so if we're going to walk the same path that Jesus walked, we have to find those around us who have wandered away from the flock, who are in need. And then maybe we go some places where we don't want to go. We do things that make us feel uncomfortable. We encounter people we'd rather not encounter in order to do what Jesus wants us to do. We found it amazing a couple of weeks ago when Kathy and I were down in Cuba, and the people there are just outstanding. But the little churches that are there, and there's a lot of Episcopal churches in Cuba actually. There's 44 of them and have like 10,000 Episcopalians. But the little churches are doing things not just for them, but for the whole community. St. Mary Magdalene in that one little town, they're putting in a water purification plant, not for the church, but for the whole community of hundreds of people. Down the road at St. Mary the Virgin, they have put in a farm. They're growing fruits and vegetables, and it's going to be self-sustaining. They're raising pigs, and they keep the waste from that. They convert the methane to cook with. They convert the rest of it to fertilizer. And this is not just for the Christians, but for the whole community. Several thousand people, they're doing this because they feel this is what God has called them to do. And I hate to say it, but God got hold of my heart there too, so I'm buying them a windmill so they can generate their own electricity and be energy independent. And it's not easy to get money to Cuba these days. As a matter of fact, the check went to the Bishop of Miami, and they're installing a new assisting bishop on May the 9th, and the dean of the cathedral from Havana is going to be there, so the check I wrote will be converted to cash, given to the dean, and he'll put it in his pocket and take it back with him when he goes back to Cuba. Otherwise, it's illegal. But God calls us to do things like that sometimes. So the Good Shepherd cares for each other. And we have to remember, we're not just called to accept God's care as sheep. We're also called to return that as shepherds to those around us who are in need, who are in want, who are suffering, or who are hurting in some way. And many of us do a great job of hiding our hurts and pains. And so we have to look behind the face mask that many of us wear and say what's going on. And then go to those people and say, what can I do for you? Can I take you, as the 23rd Psalm says, can I lead you behind still waters? Can I find a place to revive your soul? Can I take you to a place of quietness and peace? Can I help you in some way discover healing that Peter and John brought to that man in the temple? All this we do because of Jesus Christ. All this we do because he's not crazy. He really is God's Son. So on Good Shepherd Sunday, we can be sheep, but we're also shepherds. That's kind of the mystery of who we are. So as we go forth today, let us remember the words of St. John Chrysostom. If you cannot find Christ in the beggar at the front door, you're not going to find Christ in the chalice of the altar. So as we partake of the chalice, when we leave, look for the beggars in need. They may be at the front door. They may be next door to you at school or at home. They may be next to you this morning in the pew. So look around and find them and serve your role as one of the shepherds